So Prime Minister Narendra Modi has left for Japan's Hiroshima to attend the G7 summit, and he will also be having bilateral meetings with Japan Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and French President Emmanuel Macron and UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak on the sidelines of the G7 summit. Now, in the G7 summit, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to address sessions on subjects like peace, stability, gender equality and climate change. Now, remember, Japan, which is hosting this G7 summit this year, has invited India as the guest country because India is not a part of the group of the 7 countries. And Prime Minister Modi is also scheduled to have over 40 engagements with over 24 world leaders as well as bilateral meetings. And he is also going to unveil a Gandhi bust in Hiroshima. So Prime Minister Modi has already left for Japan to attend the G7 summit, and he will also be having bilateral meetings with Japan Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, French President Emmanuel Macron, as well as UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and he will be having over 40 engagements with over 24 world leaders as well as bilateral meetings. And remember, India is not a part of the group of 7 countries, but Japan has invited India as the guest country, where India will be having bilateral meetings as well. And in fact, a Quad meeting is also scheduled to take place in Japan, which was earlier scheduled to take place in Australia, but had to be cancelled because after Joe Biden, US President Joe Biden called off his visit. But now it will be taking place in Japan, as all the 4 leaders will be present in Japan for the G7 summit. So the latest update, Prime Minister Modi has left for Japan for the G7 summit, where he will be addressing the G7 summit on multiple topics, including peace, stability, gender equality and climate change. And in fact, he will also be unveiling a Gandhi bust in Hiroshima. And now remember, Japan, which is hosting the G7 this year, has invited India as the guest country, and India has been a regular guest at the G7. Earlier also, countries had invited India as the guest country, and India is a part of the G7 summit this year as well. Let's listen into some reactions that are coming on this.
G7, so we would like Japan to also have an action towards the Chinese government human rights violations.
What is your appeal to the global leaders here?
We would like to ask them to stop the human rights violations right now, and by the means of the sanctions, to let the Chinese relatives that do not act so too over, or maybe because in Hong Kong right now they're which is having couldn't have the justice of rules, so we would like to stop that kind of unfair judgment right now.
With the continuing crackdown on democratic rights in Hong Kong by China, what kind of future do you see for your country, Hong Kong?
I think there will be no more freedom, and also any means of freedom coming in the coming future. I think, as you know, the district council election has been changed, the rules, and the election votes by the means of Chinese government, and we can't vote for the.
So our political editor Maria Shakil, who is in Hiroshima to cover the G7 summit, is joining us. Maria, over to you.
Yes, so I'm coming to you live from inside the International Media Center. You can see a massive setup here. That's where the journalists from all across the world have come here. A number of them have covered several G7 summits. This massive stadium-like structure, if you can see, has proper internet facilities and other facilities which are needed by journalists so that they can broadcast straight into their countries. With me is Stephen, who has covered 7 G7 summits, and he's here for the 8th one. Stephen, he's from the German radio. Stephen, the messaging that is coming, particularly with the fact that this is being hosted by Japan and they have chosen Hiroshima as the city.
Yes, of course, Hiroshima is a very symbolic city, and Germany is very sensitive to nuclear threats. We have been living under nuclear threats for a long period of time during the Cold War. The idea that the war in Ukraine can escalate into a nuclear dimension is very present in Germany. So the symbolic meaning of a place like Hiroshima is very much seen in Germany, particularly in these times when we are talking about nuclear threats, not only in Europe under the impression of the war in Ukraine, but also in the Asian Pacific region.
Have you interacted with any of the survivors? I did with one of them. And, it's almost like 1945 continues to lurk behind every place that you visit in Hiroshima. It's been 78 years, but the world has not really come to a conclusion of giving a roadmap on disarmament.
Yes, of course, but we are seeing that the G7 will commit to nuclear disarmament and that they will call for effective nuclear disarmament. At the same time, they will strengthen the commitment to support Ukraine with weapons against the Russian aggression. So it's a very ambivalent messaging we will be seeing from the summit.
And the irony of it as well, that of the 7 G7 members, 3 of them, including United States, have nuclear weapons. The challenges that we are seeing a live conflict between Russia and Ukraine. There are challenges coming from China and, of course, North Korea as well.
Yes, of course, North Korea, and that will be, I think, a part of the Japanese message in this summit. The German Chancellor, with whom I'm traveling, will visit the Republic of Korea, South Korea, immediately after the G7 summit. So the fact that there is an actual nuclear threat from North Korea and that North Korean ballistic missiles can not only reach the United States but also Western Europe will be maybe more present in the public perception in Germany after this summit than before.
Yes, and Stephen, the last question, because I know you have your own broadcast to go for, the presence of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He will be also unveiling a Gandhi bust inside the Peace Memorial. India certainly being watched by the world.
Well, of course, we have seen very close relations between the German government and India, and we have seen the Indian Prime Minister being a guest in the G7 summit last year in Germany, in Elmau. We have seen the Chancellor, we have seen the German Foreign Minister. I've accompanied the German Foreign Minister when she visited India. So the fact that countries like India have become very important political players in the global arena has become more and more aware in German politics and public.
Yes, and India being the representative and the face and the voice of the global South.
Well, is it the only face? We are seeing, of course, also countries like Brazil being important voices of the global South, but Germany, like many other European and Western countries, are, of course, rethinking their approach to the countries of the global South, acknowledging their growing not only economical but also political importance.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Take care. So we have seen, several journalists from all across the world looking at G7 from their own country's perspective. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be participating in 3 outreach sessions. And it becomes particularly important because Indian Prime Minister, he is the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Hiroshima after India went for Pokhran nuclear test in 1975. And India, of course, is also not a signatory of nuclear non-proliferation treaty. So the symbolism and the big messaging continues from India that India is a nuclear power, but yes, we are also a responsible nuclear power.